Hi, everybody. I'm Big John, and this week on Liberty Lens, a 37-year-old ICU nurse named Alex Preddy was shot and killed by the U.S. Border Patrol in Minneapolis during yet another immigration enforcement operation. Trump administration officials have said that he was an assassin who had a gun and violently resisted arrest. However, videos and witnesses tell a very different story. Tonight, we're going to unpack what really happened and ask perhaps the bigger question. When the state kills a citizen and controls the narrative, is that tough law enforcement? Or is that something that tears at the very fabric of our republic? And as always, here to help me suss out all the issues and perhaps make some sense out of everything, none other than my friend and co host, RLC member, Mr. Mike Termott. Mike, how are you doing today?
John, it's good to be with you. It's good to be with you during these wintry, icy, snowy times across the United States. I'm sorry once again that I have to say, I'm sorry that it's under these circumstances. I'm sorry that we are now analyzing the second, and there have been others, but now we're spending a whole episode for the second time analyzing an ICE shooting that led to a death. And I'm glad that you and I are going to take the approach that while the case itself is important, and we're going to spend some time talking about the case and what happened, that the implications of the case itself and how we got here are important, and there are important implications of how the government at various levels is handling this and implications for going forward. So thank you in advance for all of that.
Yeah, I share your sentiment that it's important that we discuss this, but at the same time, it's also incredibly disheartening that we have to discuss this and that we're in the position to try to suss out yet another tragedy. All right, so this on January 24th, as has been almost the daily case in Minnesota, Minneapolis, there are ICE enforcement actions and there are protests. We touched on, I believe, last week. Look, neither side is acting very responsibly here. On the one hand, you have the Trump administration that is trying to be tough, trying to signal its toughness and its commitment to these immigration enforcement actions. And on the other side, you have the local populists, the local politicians, the Governor Waltz, A.G. Ellison, the mayors saying, "Hey, this is basically a Gestapo operation, and we need to resist it. These are not tactics that we need to abide by." And there's been no intra-agency cooperation. We've covered that. We'll cover it again. But on the 24th, during one of these operations, Alex Preddy, a 37-year-old ICU nurse and a U.S. citizen, was shot and killed by Border Patrol agents. Now, as you and I have always lamented, seemingly within minutes of the incident, aside from the typical insta responses that you would see on social media, perhaps more importantly, you had the Trump administration trying to grab hold of the narrative, trying to set the tone of the narrative. And here's some quotes from high-ranking officials, Mike, and I'll ask you to reply to them. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said Preddy approached officers with a handgun and violently resisted the officers, thereby implying agents fired in self-defense. Deputy White House Chief of Staff Stephen Miller went even further. He labeled Preddy a, quote, would-be assassin and, quote, domestic terrorist who tried to murder federal law enforcement. Border Patrol Commander Gregory Bovino, who has quickly shut up my list of favorites, echoed and amplified,
Sarcasm noted.
yeah, echoed and amplified the threat framing, stating or suggesting that Preddy may have intended to massacre law enforcement. In other words, he wasn't even speaking to facts or perceived facts. He was speaking to intent. And again, all these statements were made almost immediately in the aftermath of the news breaking of the shooting. Before we switch over and be fair to get some of the stuff that was said from the Minnesota side of the fence, Mike, tell me your reaction to these and other statements. We have other statements, but those were maybe perhaps the highlights or lowlights from the Trump administration.
Yeah, well put. And by the way, we are going to be awfully critical of these really dopey things that were said by federal government officials and the dopey things that were said by Minnesota and local officials as well. I should note that this is going to be one of those episodes about which you're going to be disappointed if you just want to take sides. If you just want
Right.
to, if you want your team to come out ahead and you want to feel good about how smart politicians are on your team, this episode may not be for you. If you can't handle nuance and you can't handle reality, this may not be an episode that's going to let you sleep well because there's enough dopiness to go around. You and I have said this many times. I'm not going to put up with people saying that you and I are not supportive of protesters because we are.
Right.
We think that you should be out there protesting when there's something wrong. I've argued you shouldn't be doing it in the face of police officers. You should be doing it in the face of decision makers. But that's maybe one step that's more subtle. And we agree with the president's. At least I should speak for myself. I agree with the president's agenda of getting some control over our southern border. We are a nation of laws, and therefore we have to enforce our immigration laws. ICE is the agency tasked with doing that. We're not arguing that ICE shouldn't be uh, pursuing its mandate, particularly given that there's a political mandate to do so as well. What we are talking about is how all of that is executed, right? And what happens because of it. The statements that came out to start to answer your question, the statements that came out immediately after the shooting were dopey on, I think, two different levels. One is that there were statements of fact made at all.
Correct.
Law enforcement doesn't do that. And there's a reason law enforcement doesn't do that. Law enforcement doesn't do that because you don't have all the facts right away. And because there are always going to be facts that come out that make you look silly after the fact. You come out and you say something, and then 24 hours later, there's more facts, and what you have said on the record makes you look dumb, and you don't want to do that, right?
Right.
You don't want to do that, and doing that undermines your credibility, undermines the agency's credibility, and it can bias prosecution. It can bias juries if anything were to go to trial, either in a civil sense or in a criminal sense, or at the very least, there'll be attorneys who are accusing you of bias. There are
Right.
all kinds of reasons why you don't shoot your mouth off right away.
Right.
Not the least of which, in this particular case, one of your objectives should be to get the community to settle down. And
Right.
I don't get the impression that anyone was trying with their rhetoric to get the community to settle down.
Well, there's 2 points, Mike, right? I agree with you. The initial rhetoric coming out of the Trump administration, not only was it not de-escalating the situation, one would argue that in combination with what happened in the Renee Good incident and the heavy-handed approach to the enforcement actions, it's not just I would argue it's not an isolated incident of being tone deaf and not an isolated incident of not reading the room, but a conscious decision to not care about the temperature in Minnesota.
So it would seem, I agree with you, John. So it would seem, particularly, not only, I agree with you wholeheartedly if the greater context includes what has been happening,
Right.
but consider the greater context of law enforcement in general. Consider the past 100 years, right?
Right.
When these things happen, you need to say, I think there's two basic things that you need to say in some version, along with whatever dopiness you're going to say. There's two
Right.
things that need to be said, which is if we screwed up, we're going to hold accountable those who screwed up.
Right.
If you do not say that, you leave the impression that it's not going to happen. And
Well,
that's because go ahead.
I'm sorry, Mike. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I needed to jump in because I feel my teeth about to fly out of my mouth. Not only has the Trump administration left that impression, not only have they connoted that that's not going to happen, they've denoted that it won't happen.